Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and this is a review of Rambo 5, Rambo Last Blood. And I think it was a pretty disappointing movie. It's not terrible, I don't hate it. It was just kind of okay for a one-time viewing, I would say. But if you expected to see the same kind of movie as the older Rambo movies, you will be greatly disappointed because it's a totally different style of movie. I would say it's more like a Rocky movie than a Rambo movie. And really, it could have been just any generic action movie with Stallone without calling it Rambo. It would be better probably because they called it Rambo just to try to cash in on that name. But that will only piss off fans because it's nothing like the older movies and the main character doesn't even feel like the same character at all. So what's the point of even making it a Rambo movie? And I'm always saying a sequel doesn't have to and maybe even shouldn't follow the exact same formula of the previous movies. It's okay to shake things up, to do new things, but if it's the same exact character, then it should at least feel slightly similar or have to continue some of the plot lines from the previous movie or something. So to do it kind of as a totally standalone movie which could have been anything else and call it a sequel, that's just annoying because it's obvious they just did it for the money to cash in on that name. And so ultimately I would say the movie is disappointing. I didn't find it boring, but it had very little action. Most of the action was in the very end of the movie, just in a few minutes. And the special effects there were pretty good, like it was very gory and messy and brutal, but it wasn't really challenging in any way to the main hero. In that last act of the movie, at no point I felt like Rambo is in danger or that he might not win, so it was just all too easy for him in the very end, and that's a big problem because I think the old formula of the old movies were much better, in which the hero has to struggle to win. It's not easy, it's just barely winning, and you feel like he might lose in the very end, and then only in the last second he wins. That was the formula in all the old action movies. And I think that old formula simply works best because that way it's the most exciting, the most satisfying way to do this kind of story of a kind of a revenge movie. So you have the hero suffer some horrible defeat, then the hero overcomes that defeat and manages to win, and then in the last battle also is the same formula of the hero almost losing and then just barely winning. That's simply the most satisfying overall formula, and so this movie totally breaks the formula. It did use it a little bit in the middle of the movie, in which Rambo is basically at his lowest point, and then in the end he plans his revenge, and then he sets a trap for the bad guys, but then that final sequence, it was all just too easy all the way through, and even there was no final fight. Like usually in these kinds of movies, the villain has a whole bunch of henchmen who are easily defeated, but then the main boss is the toughest guy, and that is more difficult, and then there's some kind of final fight between the hero and the villain. And it might be a little bit cheesy and corny, but it is the most satisfying way to do this kind of movie. And this movie didn't do that. And so when it all ended, I was like, that's all? So that was kind of disappointing. And there's a whole bunch of things in the movie that don't really lead anywhere. They set up all kinds of stuff and don't do anything with it. And the movie was kind of dark and depressing, which I guess was necessary to set up those villains. They had to make them look so horrible so that we won't feel pity for them when the action starts in the end, to see everything that Rambo is doing to these guys. So this way we're entertained by it. It's the same kind of stuff that Tarantino always does. He sets up the villains in a way that makes you hate them, and then you don't feel sorry for them when the whole brutal bloody stuff starts happening to them. So it's the same kind of thing in this movie, and the special effects in that part were pretty good. It was very brutal, very bloody, very gory, and it looked great. So I did like those few minutes in the end of actual action, but it was all too one-sided and too easy in my opinion. But what annoyed me a little bit, that all of that plan worked too perfectly. Like he set up a whole bunch of traps, and each of the traps works perfectly and kills exactly the same number of people who came in there. So it all worked exactly as planned, and almost nothing went wrong, and it was all just too easy for a Rambo, and so that was a little bit disappointing. And also in the end he blows up all those tunnels, so I'm thinking, wait, if he could do that, then why couldn't he just do that from the beginning? Why the need to set up so many traps? Did he just do it for fun, or was he enjoying all that brutality? I guess it's possible. I also heard some people complain of the plot point of why he even bothered to build those tunnels. I don't actually have a problem with that because I do think that fits his character, because if he's a character who has a PTSD, who can't sleep at night, who is paranoid, and all that kind of stuff, then it would make sense for him to kind of set up this place in which he will feel secure. So I can accept the idea of him setting up that whole tunnel system simply because it makes him feel secure, because he knows he'll be able to defend himself no matter what in those tunnels, and so I don't actually have a problem with that part. But in the end of the movie, when it all works so perfectly well, even though a whole army of people come to get him and it's just way too easy for him, that's what annoys me. I think it should have been more challenging, things shouldn't have gone exactly as planned, and at least have a final boss fight scene in the end to make it a little bit more exciting and more challenging, then it would be more fun. Also, a lot of people complain about all of this reminding them of Home Alone, of Rambo setting up a whole bunch of traps against the bad guys, and I can see that point. However, it does fit Rambo, because we saw in the previous movies as well that he's good at that, he knows how to set traps and all of that. It was a little bit over the top here, but that was fun. I'm not demanding total realism from a movie, so I don't mind a little bit over the topness, and in fact I would have rather a little bit more of that, just for the fun of it, just for the sake of it. I mean, you have this whole setup anyway, so just go with it all the way through, do something totally over the top crazy, just for the fun of it. I would have enjoyed it probably more even. I mean, it can't be any crazier than Rambo 3, in which he took out the whole Soviet army single-handedly, all by himself, and it was still a fun and memorable movie. So I wouldn't actually mind them going totally crazy in the end. It would have made it more entertaining, maybe, in my opinion. And speaking of Rambo 3, I always felt like a Rambo sequel should have been him going back to Afghanistan for some reason. I think that would have been like a proper sequel, because they could have continued so many things that they set up back then. Because remember in Rambo 3, he befriended that kid who he saved from the Soviets, and he gave him his necklace and stuff. And so imagine in a proper Rambo sequel, him going back to Afghanistan for some reason, maybe to take out some terrorist leader, maybe some member of his family died by a terror attack or something, his new wife or something. You can set up something like that. And then he goes on a personal revenge mission to kill that terrorist, and then he shows up back in Afghanistan. And then maybe that same kid that he saved in Rambo 3, maybe he would be the villain or one of the villains of the movie. And this way the hero and the villain would have some kind of personal connection. They know each other from the past. He once saved that villain when he was just a boy. And maybe that villain kind of admires and respects Rambo. And so they have like a personal connection. And that makes the whole situation not black and white, but rather more complex than that. And that complexity, that's what makes such stories more interesting. That's why in all the comic book movies and in all the comic books, always the hero and the villain had some kind of personal connection. It was never totally black and white. That's why in Star Wars, when they revealed that Darth Vader is Luke's father, that immediately made it all much more interesting. It added depth to the villain. It made him a much more interesting character. If not for that, it would be just black and white boring. And so I think they should have done something like that in a Rambo sequel, to have him go back to Afghanistan, this time being on the other side, and now having to fight some of the same people that he helped in Rambo 3. And it would have retroactively kind of made Rambo 3 more interesting, because, as it stands, Rambo 3 is kind of ridiculous, because it's kind of like a propaganda movie against the Soviets, and they're showing the Mujahideen as the good guys, as freedom fighters, but obviously looking back, it's kind of ridiculous now. So I actually think after 9/11 they should have done a sequel to Rambo of him going back to Afghanistan, and this time to fight Islamic terrorists, and also maybe to play around with that whole distinction, that whole gray area of what is a terrorist and what is a freedom fighter, to play with that whole shady territory, with that whole morality question and all of that, and also to have a more interesting villain of maybe that same kid that he saved in Rambo 3, have him be the villain or one of the villains of the movie. And this way you could have scenes of Rambo just talking with him, trying to convince him to kind of leave the dark side, you could say, and stuff like that. And that would add a lot of drama to all those kind of scenes. And instead we have these really simplistic sequels, which are not really memorable in any way, not really interesting in any way, except for some of the action maybe. And Rambo 4 had the same problem. It had a whole bunch of very fun action scenes. It had a lot of gory stuff to it, but it didn't really have any kind of interesting story. It was all very simplistic, all very black and white, and no depth to anything. And so that makes it less memorable and very boring kind of as a story, I'm saying. It can still be entertaining just as an action movie, but I think a really great movie should have some good story as well, and that's why the first few Rambo movies were really good, because they also had the story, they had something to remember except for the action scenes. And so even Rambo 4 had that same problem that I'm describing, that it didn't really have any interesting story. The villain was totally forgettable. I don't even remember what that movie was about. I only remember some little bits, some good action scenes, and that's it. And the villain just was just the bad guy, and that's it. So it's kind of boring that way. And also I think Rambo kind of killed the bad guys very easily, and that's it. So it's not, it doesn't feel challenging. It's all too easy, and it's just kind of a bloodbath of the hero killing off all the bad guys, and that's it. That's too simplistic. And so the same problem is in this new movie. The bad guys are just bad guys with no personality, no depth to them, no complexity, and Rambo just has to kill them all, and he does that way too easily, and that's it, and that's the end of the movie. So that's kind of disappointing. And this is the same exact problem that is happening in a lot of new movies nowadays. We always complain about new superheroes who are female, who everything comes too easily to them. I always say my problem with that is not of them being females. My problem of a hero who is unchallenged, who is everything comes so easily to him or her, and that hero just defeats all the bad guys with ease, with no challenge, and that's boring, that's not fun. And I know that was a problem in some older movies as well, and I think it was fine when it was kind of over the top so much that it's almost like a comedy, like some of the Arnold movies and all of that, that he's kind of a larger than life hero and nothing can touch him, and he just kills the bad guys easily. That can be fun if it's over the top. If the movie is so over the top that it just becomes ridiculous and kind of unintentional comedy, then it's good in my opinion. But if the movie is trying to be serious and realistic, then you can't do it like that. Then it has to be challenging for the hero. You can't have it both ways. It doesn't work like that in my opinion. So that's the problem in a lot of new movies, that they don't seem to get the kind of formula that should be in these kinds of movies. If it's a revenge story, then you should either make it over the top completely and just for the sake of it, just do it, like Kill Bill, like kill a whole bunch of people. It's like in pure entertainment, just for the fun of it. Or if you're going for that more gritty, realistic, serious movie, then have it be much more challenging for the hero. Kind of like, the first Die Hard movie. That was a good movie because you could feel as if it's happening for real. You could feel you're on the edge of your seat. You're afraid for the main character because he gets injured, he's bleeding, he's sweating, he's almost losing all the time. So it becomes much more realistic and tenseful and all of that. So that's a good thing. On the other hand, you can have a totally over-the-top action movie like Commando with Arnold and just have him go and kill everybody with ease and no one can touch him. That can be entertaining and funny as well. But you can't have it both ways together. It doesn't work. You can't make a serious, realistic movie with an over-the-top hero. It just doesn't work together well. And so that's kind of what happened in this movie. Most of it is totally serious and gritty and depressing movie, and suddenly in the end it's like that over-the-top action movie of him killing everybody with ease, with no challenge, and then it's not really over-the-top enough, and there's not even a final boss fight, and so there's no challenge at all. Even in those over-the-top movies I mentioned, like Commando, there's still that last fight with the big bad, which is challenging to the hero. Even in those over-the-top movies, they still had that kind of formula, simply because it's the most entertaining and satisfying that way. You have to make it at least a little bit challenging in the end. But in all the recent movies, that whole thing was totally forgotten apparently. So in every new movie, the main hero is just untouchable, indestructible, and that's boring. And so that's the same problem that a lot of people always complain about all the female heroes, but I don't think the problem is of them being female heroes. The problem is the same one as in this movie, of things just being too easy for the hero. I guess you can say in this one they did have a challenge to the hero in the middle of the movie, of him going through all the psychological trauma and all of that. So I guess people who like those kinds of psychological difficult movies, then they might like this one. But if you're looking for just an entertaining action movie, you will probably be disappointed. And as a Rambo sequel, I think this one is terrible. It doesn't continue anything from any of the previous movies, and it could have just been called something else and probably would have been better off that way. So that's my opinion on this movie. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.